Welcome to True Spark Stories. Today's tale is about a woman who spent 7 years being called invisible until the day she made an entire tech empire disappear from under her husband's feet. If stories of calculated justice give you chills, hit that subscribe button. We bring you a new transformation every single day. Now let's dive in. The gavel didn't just hit the wood. It sounded like a guillotine dropping. Mirabel didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still in the plush leather chair of the high-end mediation suite, her hands folded over a cheap plastic folder. Across from her, Kelvin was leaning back, his Italian leather shoes resting on the edge of the mahogany table. He looked every bit the tech billionaire the media worshipped. Sharp, arrogant, and entirely bored by the woman he had been married to for 7 years. His lawyer, a man whose smile looked like it had been surgically applied, pushed a single sheet of paper toward Mirabel. "Sign it, Mirabel," Kelvin said, his voice dripping with a casual cruelty that still managed to sting. "The 50,000 is a gift. Honestly, considering you haven't worked a day since we moved to Palo Alto, I'm being generous. You were a waitress when I found you, and you're leaving with enough to buy a very nice food truck. Let's call it even." Mirabel looked at the paper, then at the clock. It was 1:15 p.m. She said nothing. She didn't even look at the check. Instead, her eyes drifted to the very back of the room. There, sitting in a folding chair meant for observers, was a man who didn't belong in a mediation suite. He was dressed in a suit that cost more than Kelvin's entire car collection. He was Elias Thorne, a man whose name was whispered in central banks and private islands. He was staring at his phone, his face an unreadable mask of stone. "Is she even listening?" Kelvin's lawyer hissed. "Mrs. Vance, if this goes to open court, my client will be forced to bring up your lack of contribution to the household. It will be embarrassing. The press will eat you alive." "The Silent Gold Digger. That's the headline Kelvin has ready to go." Kelvin chuckled, checking his Rolex. "She's probably just trying to remember how to spell her name. Look, Mirabel, I have a board meeting at 3. We're finalizing the Apex Tech merger. I don't have time for your theatrics. Sign the papers, take the money, and disappear. You were a great trophy for a while, but I've outgrown this shelf." Still, Mirabel remained silent. Her silence wasn't a sign of fear. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. Kelvin began to fidget. He hated when he couldn't provoke a reaction. "Fine, be a martyr," Kelvin snapped, his face reddening. "But when you're back in that cramped apartment in the city, don't come crawling back. I'm moving the company to the next level. I'm about to become a household name globally, and you're just a footnote." He stood up, hovering over her, trying to use his height to intimidate her. Mirabel simply adjusted her folder. Inside, it wasn't a plea for more money. It was a countdown. "You think that man in the back is going to save you?" Kelvin sneered, gesturing toward Elias Thorne. "I don't know why Thorne is here. Maybe he's looking to buy the building. But he doesn't even know you exist. You're invisible, Mirabel. You've always been invisible." Mirabel finally looked up. She didn't look at her husband. She looked at Elias. The billionaire in the back row finally looked away from his phone. He offered a nearly imperceptible nod. "1 minute," Elias said. His voice was like deep gravel. It was the first time anyone in the room had heard him speak. "1 minute for what?" Kelvin asked, his brow furrowing. "Thorne, if you're here for the Apex Tech deal, we should talk in my office, not in front of my soon-to-be ex-wife. She doesn't understand business." "I'm not here for your office, Kelvin," Elias said, standing up. He was a head taller than Kelvin, and twice as imposing. He walked toward the table, but he didn't stop at Kelvin's side. He walked right behind Mirabel's chair and placed a hand on the headrest. Kelvin's lawyer stood up, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. "Mr. Thorne, this is a private legal matter. Unless you are representing Mrs. Vance." "I don't represent her," Elias said. "I work for her." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush lungs. Kelvin burst out laughing, a shrill, nervous sound. You work for her? She can't even afford the coffee you're drinking. Mirabel, what is this? Did you hire an actor to try and scare me? This is pathetic. Mirabel opened her folder. She pulled out a tablet and slid it across the table. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a live feed of the New York Stock Exchange. It's 2 p.m., Kelvin, Mirabel said. Her voice was clear, calm, and carried a weight that made Kelvin's lawyer sit back down abruptly. What does the time have to do with anything? Kelvin demanded, his eyes darting to the tablet. The Apex Tech merger, Mirabel said softly. You've been so focused on finalizing it. You spent 18 months building a platform that you thought was revolutionary. You thought you were the only one with the key to the market, but you forgot one thing. You forgot who wrote your original code while you were out networking at bars in the early days. Kelvin turned pale. That was just basic stuff. I refined it. No, Mirabel said, her eyes flashing with a cold fire. I refined it, and then, while you were busy cheating on me with your lead designer, I built a secondary architecture. I created a company called A-Star Holdings. We've been shorting your stock for 6 months, Kelvin, and as of 60 seconds ago, A-Star Holdings has completed a hostile takeover of Apex Tech. You aren't going to a board meeting at 3. You're going to be escorted out of the building by the security team I just hired. Kelvin grabbed the tablet, his fingers trembling as he scrolled through the news alerts. Asterisk Apex Tech acquired. CEO Kelvin Vance ousted. Mysterious founder A-Star revealed as Mirabel Vance. Asterisk. This isn't possible, Kelvin whispered. You're just Mirabel. I was just your wife, she corrected him, standing up. Now, I'm your landlord, your former employer, and the person who owns the patents to every single piece of tech you claim to have invented. Elias Thorne stepped forward, laying a thick stack of documents on the table. These are the new terms of divorce, Kelvin. Mirabel is being generous. She's leaving you the car. But the house, the shares, and the name, those stay with the creator. Kelvin looked up at Elias, then at Mirabel, his face twisting in a mixture of rage and desperation. Mirabel, honey, let's talk about this. We're a team. I was just stressed. I didn't mean those things about the 50,000. We can rebuild together. Mirabel didn't even blink. The silence is over, Kelvin. And so are we. She walked toward the door, her heels clicking rhythmically on the floor. Elias followed a step behind her, the ultimate shadow. Kelvin stayed in his chair, staring at the $50,000 check, the very trap he had set for her, which was now the only thing he had left in the world. As Mirabel reached the door, she paused and looked back over her shoulder. By the way, she said, a small, genuine smile finally appearing on her lips. The billionaire in the back row, he's my brother, and he's been waiting for me to leave you for a very long time. She stepped out into the sunlight, the heavy doors closing behind her with a definitive thud. Kelvin was left in the dim light of the room, ruined by the woman he thought was nothing. Have you ever watched someone realize, too late, that they completely underestimated you? That moment when the truth hits, and there's nothing they can do to take it back? If you felt that satisfaction, even once, drop a fire in the comments. And if you're hooked on this story, that subscribe button helps us bring you these transformations every single day. The heavy oak doors of the mediation suite had barely clicked shut when internal chaos in the room erupted. Kelvin surged to his feet, knocking his chair backward with a violent crash. He stared at the closed door, then at the tablet, then at Elias Thorne's empty chair. His breathing was shallow, the kind of hyperventilation that comes when a person's entire reality dissolves in a matter of seconds. This is a prank, Kelvin hissed, turning to his lawyer. Tell me this is a legal maneuver. She can't own A-Star. She doesn't even have a personal bank account. I saw to that. His lawyer, however, wasn't looking at Kelvin. He was frantically scrolling through his own phone, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. Kelvin, the SEC filings were just updated. It's not a prank. A-Star Holdings has been acquiring shell companies for 3 years. The funding came from a blind trust established in Zurich. We thought it was an institutional investor. It wasn't. It was her. 3 years. Kelvin roared, the veins in his neck bulging. We were married. Everything she owns is mine. Not as she built it using premarital intellectual property that you signed away in that silly paperwork you made her sign when we started the company, the lawyer whispered, looking horrified. Remember the invention assignment, waiver you had everyone sign? You told her to sign it to keep things clean. But she didn't sign the one that gave the rights to Apex Tech. She signed a version that retained her personal ownership of the core engine. You never checked the filing, Kelvin. You just wanted her to stay out of the office. Outside, the air felt different to Mirabel. For 7 years, she had felt like she was breathing through a filter, always adjusting her volume to suit Kelvin's ego. Now, the California sun felt hot and real on her skin. Elias walked beside her, his presence a silent shield. You did well, Elias said, his voice devoid of its earlier coldness. The look on his face when the notification hit, I should have recorded it for the board. I didn't do it for the look on his face, Elias, Mirabel said, though a small part of her knew that was a lie. I did it because he tried to erase me. He thought he could delete my contributions to the tech world just because he was the one standing on the stage. So, what's the first move as the official owner of Apex Tech? Elias asked, opening the door to a waiting black SUV. The first move, Mirabel said, stepping into the vehicle, is to go to the office. I want to see his face when I sit in that chair. And I want to make sure the lead designer, the one he's been spending my money on, has her desk cleared out by the time I arrive. The drive to the Apex Tech headquarters was a blur of high-speed reality. Mirabel's phone was blowing up with alerts. The tech world was in a frenzy. Who is Mirabel Vance was a trending topic on every platform. Investors were panicking, but the stock price was actually stabilizing. The market liked the idea of a secret genius at the helm more than a Playboy CEO. As they pulled up to the glass and steel monolith that Kelvin had called his empire, security was already at the front. 2 men in dark suits stepped forward. They didn't block Mirabel. They bowed. Welcome, Ms. Vance, the head of security said. We've received the updated protocols from Mr. Thorne. Mr. Vance's access has been revoked. Mirabel walked through the lobby. She remembered coming here a year ago to bring Kelvin dinner because he was too busy to come home. The receptionist had made her wait for 40 minutes. Today, the receptionist stood up so fast she nearly tripped over her headset. Ms. Vance, I have your credentials ready. I am so sorry about the wait last time, the girl stammered. Mirabel didn't stop. She didn't need to. She headed straight for the executive elevator. Inside, the mirrored walls showed a woman who looked nothing like the trophy wife from that morning. Her eyes were sharp, her posture was regal, and the plastic folder she'd been clutching was gone, replaced by a sleek, custom-built mobile terminal. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, the silence was deafening. The entire floor had stopped working. Dozens of engineers and executives were huddled around television screens. On every screen, Mirabel's face from a grainy college graduation photo was being broadcast. She walked toward Kelvin's office. Or rather, her office. Standing in front of the door was Sarah, the lead designer Kelvin had been seeing. She was holding a latte, her face a mask of smug confusion. Mirabel, what are you doing here? Sarah asked, blocking the doorway. Kelvin is in a meeting. You can't just burst in. You know the rules about spouses in the workspace. The rules have changed, Sarah, Mirabel said, not slowing down. Excuse me? You need to leave before I call security, Sarah snapped, putting a hand on Mirabel's arm. Elias Thorne stepped out from behind Mirabel, his shadow falling over the smaller woman. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Security is currently occupied with removing your personal belongings from the building. Sarah's face went white. What? You're fired, Sarah, Mirabel said, finally looking her in the eye. Not because of the affair. I don't care about that. You can have him. You're fired because you stole the UI designs from my private server 3 months ago and claimed them as your own. That's intellectual property theft. My lawyers will be in touch by the end of the day. Mirabel pushed past her and entered the office. It was exactly as Kelvin liked it. Cold, expensive, and centered around a desk that cost more than a family home. She walked around the desk and sat in the chair. It was slightly too big for her, but she didn't mind. She'd have it replaced by tomorrow. Moments later, the sound of shouting echoed from the hallway. Kelvin had arrived. He burst into the room, disheveled, his tie pulled loose. He looked like a man who had run a marathon through a thorn bush. "Get out!" Kelvin screamed, pointing at Mirabel. "Get out of my chair. This is my life. You can't take this from me." "I'm not taking it, Kelvin," Mirabel said, leaning back and interlacing her fingers. "I'm reclaiming it. You were just a temporary occupant. The lease is up. I'll sue you," Kelvin yelled, slamming his fists on the desk. "I'll tie you up in court for 20 years. You think your brother's money can protect you? I'll ruin your reputation. I'll tell everyone you're a fraud." "With what evidence?" Mirabel asked calmly. "The code is mine. The patents are mine. The capital is mine. Even this desk? I bought it with a dividend check from a company you didn't even know I owned. You've been living on my dime for 3 years, Kelvin. You were my most expensive hobby." Kelvin began to weep, not out of sadness, but out of pure unadulterated rage. He looked at the staff watching through the glass walls. He looked at Elias Thorne, who was calmly pouring himself a glass of water from Kelvin's private carafe. He realized, finally, that he was the only one in the room with no power. Elias slid a final document across the desk. "Sign this, Kelvin. It's a full transfer of ownership and a non-disclosure agreement. If you sign now, the embezzlement charges we discovered in your personal accounts will remain sealed. If you don't, we go public in 24 hours. Kelvin stared at the pen as if it were a loaded weapon. His hand trembled, hovering over the paper that would officially strip him of every lie he had built his life upon. The office, once a sanctuary of ego, now felt like a cage. Outside the glass walls, the employees he had bullied and belittled for years were staring, their faces a mix of shock and suppressed glee. "You're a monster," Kelvin whispered, his voice cracking. "I gave you a life of luxury. I put you in the best circles. And this is how you repay me? By stealing my company." "I didn't steal it, Kelvin. I founded it," Mirabel replied, her voice as steady as a surgeon's. "You were just the face. You were the visionary who couldn't even explain how the back-end API functioned during the last Series B funding round. I was the one whispering the answers into your earpiece from the green room. Did you really think I'd do that forever?" Elias Thorne checked his watch, the heavy gold link shimmering. "You have 30 seconds, Kelvin. After that, the offer to suppress the embezzlement charges expires. My legal team is already on the phone with the district attorney's office. It takes one click to send the file." With a sob of pure desperation, Kelvin grabbed a pen and scribbled his name. He threw the pen at the desk, but it skittered off the edge and fell onto the plush carpet. He looked broken, a shell of the man who had walked into the mediation room that morning. "There," Kelvin spat. "Are you happy? You've destroyed me. I hope you enjoy the view from this office. It's lonely at the top." "I won't be lonely," Mirabel said, standing up. "I have a team that actually respects me. And unlike you, I don't need to step on people to feel tall." She turned to the head of security, who was standing by the door. "Please escort Mr. Vance and Sarah from the premises. They are to be barred from all Apex Tech properties indefinitely. If they attempt to contact any staff members, legal action will be immediate." As the guards moved in, Sarah began to scream, a shrill sound that echoed through the executive wing. "You can't do this. I have a contract, which you breach when you share proprietary code with your personal cloud drive, Elias noted calmly as he ushered them toward the elevator. The floor went silent as the elevator doors hissed shut, taking Kelvin and his mistress down to the street level where the paparazzi, tipped off by an anonymous source, were already waiting. The tech king was about to have a very public fall. Mirabel didn't celebrate immediately. She sat back down and opened the terminal on the desk. She bypassed Kelvin's password with a few strokes. It was his own birthday, a final testament to his narcissism, and began to dig. She knew Kelvin was arrogant, but she didn't realize how deep his betrayal went. Deep in encrypted folders, she found a file labeled Project Legacy. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she opened it. It wasn't a business plan. It was a series of communications between Kelvin and a rival firm based in Singapore. "Elias, look at this," she called out. Elias leaned over, his brow furrowing as he read the logs. He was planning to sell the core IP, your IP, to a foreign competitor for $1 billion in crypto, then file for bankruptcy for Apex Tech. He was going to leave the company a hollow shell and run away with the cash, leaving you and the employees with nothing. Mirabel felt a cold chill wash over her. If she had waited even one more week to make her move, he would have vanished, and her life's work would have been sold off to the highest bidder in an untraceable transaction. He wasn't just divorcing me, Mirabel realized, her voice shaking for the first time. He was erasing the evidence of my existence before he burned the house down. But he failed, Elias reminded her, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. Because you were smarter. You were always 10 steps ahead, even when you were playing the part of the quiet wife. The afternoon turned into a whirlwind of activity. Mirabel called an emergency all-hands meeting in the atrium. When she stepped onto the balcony overlooking the hundreds of employees, a nervous energy filled the air. These people had worked under Kelvin's burnout culture for years. They were exhausted, scared for their jobs, and skeptical of the woman they only knew from office Christmas parties. Mirabel took the microphone. She didn't use a script. "Most of you know me as Kelvin's wife," she began, her voice projected through the speakers. "But for the last 5 years, I have been the lead architect of the code you work on every day. I am A-Star. And today, the culture of this company changes. We are no longer a company that values ego over innovation. Your jobs are safe. Your benefits are being doubled. And the Project Legacy bankruptcy plan, it's been deleted. We are going to build something that actually matters." The silence held for a heartbeat, and then a single engineer in the front started to clap. Then another. Within seconds, the atrium erupted into a roar of applause that shook the glass walls. For the first time in its history, Apex Tech felt alive. That evening, as Mirabel stood on the executive balcony watching the sun set over Silicon Valley, she noticed a black car pulling up to the building's side entrance. A man stepped out, his silhouette familiar yet distant. It was Julian Vane, the only person who knew the truth about the night Mirabel's father lost his company to Kelvin's father in a rigged poker game 20 years ago. Mirabel watched him from the balcony, her heart steady. This wasn't just about a marriage or a tech company. It was about the completion of a 2-decade-long restitution. She signaled for security to let him up. When the elevator opened, Julian didn't look like a threat. He looked like a man who had finally seen a debt paid in full. "You did it, Mirabel," Julian said, stepping into the penthouse. He handed her a weathered, yellowed envelope. "Your father always said you were the sharpest of us. He knew you'd find a way to take back what they stole under the guise of business." Kelvin never knew that his father's seed money for Apex Tech was actually the stolen patent for your father's original encryption engine. Mirabel took the envelope, her fingers tracing the faded ink of her father's signature. "Kelvin thought I was a waitress he rescued. He never realized I sought him out. I had to be close enough to see where the bodies were buried. I had to make him love me or his version of love, so he would let me into the server rooms." Elias looked between the two of them, the pieces of his sister's life finally clicking into place. So the marriage wasn't just a mistake you turned into a victory. It was a mission from day one. Every day with him was a performance, Elias, Mirabel admitted, looking at the city lights. Every time he belittled me, I used that anger to write another line of code for A-Star. I didn't just want the company back. I wanted him to hand it to me while thinking he was the one in control. That is true justice. The next morning, the news was no longer just about a corporate takeover. It was a scandal that rocked the foundations of the tech industry. With the documents Julian provided, Mirabel filed a secondary lawsuit against the Vance estate for the original theft of her father's patents. By noon, Kelvin's remaining assets were frozen. He wasn't just out of a job. He was being stripped of the very inheritance that had allowed him to play at being a king. Mirabel spent the day in the engineering pits, not the executive office. She sat with the junior coders, the invisibles Kelvin had never deigned to speak to. She helped them optimize the new security protocols, her hands flying across the keyboard with a speed that left them in awe. They didn't see a billionaire's ex-wife anymore. They saw the architect. As the workday ended, Mirabel walked out to the lobby one last time. She saw a small crowd gathered near the entrance. Kelvin was there, trying to push past a new security team. He looked haggard, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. He saw Mirabel and stopped, his face contorting. "You planned this," he screamed, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "From the night we met at that diner. It was all a lie. You never loved me." Mirabel walked toward him, stopping just out of his reach. The security guards tightened their grip on their batons, but she gestured for them to stand down. She looked at Kelvin, and for the first time, there wasn't even anger in her eyes. There was only the cold clarity of a finished task. "You're right, Kelvin," she said, her voice a calm whisper that carried more power than his shouting. "I didn't love you, but I played the part of the woman you wanted. I gave you a home. I gave you the code that made you famous, and I gave you 7 years of my life. I'd say that's more than you ever deserved. You used people as tools, Kelvin. You just didn't realize I was the sharpest tool in your shed." "I'll destroy you," Kelvin hissed, but the words had no weight. He was a man shouting at a storm. "You have nothing left to destroy me with," Mirabel replied. She pulled a single $50,000 check from her pocket, the same one he had offered her the day before. She tucked it into his tattered suit pocket. "Take the gift, Kelvin. Like you said, it's enough to buy a very nice food truck. I'd recommend the grilled cheese. It's hard to mess up, even for someone with no skills." She turned her back on him as the guards finally escorted him out into the rain. The doors of Apex Tech, now being rebranded as Sovereign Systems, closed with a heavy, final thud. Mirabel stood in the center of the lobby, surrounded by the legacy she had reclaimed. She looked up at the digital ticker tape, scrolling across the ceiling. Her father's name was now listed alongside hers as the founding genius of the core technology. The debt was paid. The silence was over. And for the first time in 20 years, Mirabel wasn't a daughter, a wife, or a secret agent of revenge. She was simply herself. She walked out of the building and into a waiting car, Julian and Elias already inside. They didn't head toward a party or a victory gala. They headed toward the small, quiet cemetery where her father was buried. She had a promise to keep. As the car pulled away, the camera pans up to the towering skyline, where the name Vance is being flickered off, one letter at a time, replaced by a glowing golden A. The world would never overlook the person in the back row ever again. Thank you for experiencing Mirabel's journey with me today. Stories like this, of hidden brilliance, calculated justice, and epic transformations, are what True Spark Stories is all about. We drop a new story every day at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. This story has now reached viewers in over 50 countries. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city and the time in the comments below. The conversation is already incredible down there, and I read every single one. I'll see you in the next story.